April 15th, 1884. Katie, darling, I know I promised to mail you a letter at every station along my journey west, but if I'm being honest, there hasn't been enough to write about. Even now, I'm at a loss to tell you anything interesting. The scenery is the same, except for the skies, of course. The skies are wide open and bluer than you can imagine. Yet this has not turned out to be the adventure I was hoping for. In fact, I'm growing quite restless. With all the stories I've heard and read about the Wild West, I suppose I assumed there would be at least a little adventure along the way. I really don't have anything to complain about, of course. I didn't realize what Sylvester was providing when he told me to purchase a first-class ticket until the porter showed me to my own private and sumptuously decorated sleeper car. I'm sure you would love it. I'll see if I can convince Sylvester to wire enough for a first-class ticket when I send for you. How are you feeling? How is the air in Mott Haven today? Are you taking your treatments and drinking your coffee like Dr. Frisbee recommended? If he hears of any new or better treatments, please use the money I left you. I know what you'll say to this, of course, but Sylvester won't mind. Besides, who needs that much money for a trousseau, even at New York prices? Even if he does mind, which he won't, he'll have to take it up with me. After all, he did say there is plenty more where that came from, so I'm not the least bit worried about it. I've been thinking about what we discussed before I left, and I agree with you. I know you don't like the smoking treatment Dr. Frisbee recommended. It seems to me that cigar smoke would only make things worse, since the smoke from the factories bothers you so much. My vote is you discontinue that one. But please, dearest, keep doing all the rest and keep taking good care of yourself until I can send for you. Most of the time in my cabin, putting the final touches on my wedding attire. I know you'll want to see the additions, so I've included a final sketch with the embroidery design I added. Access to a parlor and dining car is included with my fare. You can imagine how much I've delighted in that luxury. I'm certain I've never eaten so well. After the first 2 days of eating everything offered me, I was a little worried I wouldn't fit into my wedding dress when I arrive in Frisco. I'm learning to pace myself now. Dining among the rich and mighty has made me very glad I spent some of Sylvester's trousseau money on that traveling suit Madame Lovelace displayed in her window this fall. Imagine me trying to look elegant in one of my old calicos. Thankfully, Madame chose me to model the suit in front of the New York debutantes, so I didn't have to alter it a stitch. That gave me time to make up the matching fur-fringed dolman, which has come in handy. Spring or not, it has been glacial since leaving New York. Other than that, I've been extremely comfortable on my journey so far, except for missing you, of course. Please write and assure me all is well, that your lungs have fully cleared, and you're still on the mend. I'm ever so worried I left you too soon. Please tell me I gave you enough money for Dr. Frisbee to continue treating you. Worldwide reputation. Allen's lung balsam. Perry Davis's painkiller. The home physician. For coughs, colds, croup, and consumption. What the doctors say. Doctors Wilson and Ward, physicians and druggists, Right Iron, Centerville, Tennessee. We purchased Allen's lung balsam and it sells rapidly. We are practicing physicians as well as druggists, and take pleasure in recommending a great remedy, such as we know this to be. Physicians do not recommend a medicine which has no merit. What they say about Allen's lung balsam can be taken as fact. Let all afflicted test it at once, and be convinced of its real merits. It is harmless to the most delicate child. It contains no opium in any form, sold by all medicine dealers. Prepare for summer diseases. If you have cramps, if you have colic, if you have diarrhea, or if you have any summer complaint, and you are more than likely to suffer in that way before the season is over, buy a bottle of Perry Davis's painkiller and secure instantaneous relief after 1 or 2 doses. In treating severe attacks of cholera, bathe the bowels with the painkiller. 20 drops of Mr. Davis's wonderful medicine will cure a child of the worst case of colic. A bottle of the painkiller can be bought at any reputable drugstore. I'm anxious for you every moment and worry if I've truly made the right decision for us. I must go for now as we're pulling into Chicago Station. I'll finish my letter when we've set off again. Oh, Katie, you'll never believe what just happened. As I mentioned before, everything has been far too tranquil for the likes of me, especially since I've been hoping for my own tiny adventure to enjoy before arriving in Frisco and becoming a wife. Well, dearest, adventure has found me at last. There I was, standing on the platform in Chicago, waiting for Sylvester's man to show up and escort me the rest of the way to Frisco. Suddenly, the attention of every passenger on the platform was captured by complete pandemonium at end in the tracks. We were all crowded together, as you can imagine, and I was keeping my eye out for pickpockets and the like, so at first it was hard to see the reason for all the shouting. Then a man, obviously inebriated, stumbled out of the crowd, glanced around a moment, and then fixed his bleary eyes on me. He came straight toward me. When he seized my arm, he asked if I was the dame setting west to marry his boss Gambit. I managed to nod, despite my shock, and he proceeded to shove a small box at me, asking me to tell his boss he was sorry and that he'd try to make it back to Frisco soon. Then he just took off running toward the tracks. Before he could reach the other end of the platform, however, he was snatched on one side by a giant gentleman with a malmsey nose, and on the other side by another jimmer-jawed fellow of extremely dubious-looking character. When they began dragging Gambit's poor wretched of a man back the way he came, I finally managed to gather my wits and shouted after them, demanding they release my escort immediately. Now, you know the kind of dodgy characters I've faced in Mott's Haven, but Katie, when those 2 men turned their steely gazes on me, it sent the worst sort of shivers down my spine. For the first time in my life, I considered backing down, and I would have if the giant fellow had not reached out and grabbed hold of my arm. He said, speaking to my escort, perhaps Mr. McDonald would forgive his debt in exchange for the ginger tart, meaning myself, of course. I'm proud to say he promptly received a slap across the face for that vulgarity. The varmint tried to subdue me in return, but I wasn't about to be used as payment for some strange man's debt, even if he was my intended employee. So I kicked the giant oaf as hard as I could in the ankle really, as he was enormous, and ran for it. I wasn't 2 steps along before he had hold of me again. I screamed for him to let me go, but Katie, all those people waiting to board the train just pretended like nothing was happening. I wasn't keeping my voice down either. Not a one of them budged to help. I'm not saying I'm surprised at all. People tend to keep themselves to themselves where the fates of strangers are concerned, but it wasn't as if I was dressed like a saloon girl. So I just kept hollering like a cornered alley cat and throwing my fists against the skyser like my life depended on it. I was in the process of being hefted over the man's shoulder like a sack of potatoes when someone finally came to my aid. A man, tall and frightfully well-formed, with coffee brown hair and eyes as blue as the wide open sky I've been seeing so much of, stepped out of the crowd. Oh dear, my mouth sets to watering every time I think of the moment. Truly, Katie, he was quite the handsomest man I have ever laid eyes on. Once he'd freed me from the oaf's grasp, he put himself between me and danger and prepared himself for a fight. But when he turned back to confront the villains, the pair of them had already vanished in the crowd with my escort in tow. So, my rescuer, one Mr. Matthew Hickman, saw me safely onto the train to Salt Lake City and informed me those men work for an Irish mob boss by the name of Mike McDonald, and that I was lucky he came along when he did. Of course, he didn't need to tell me that. Apparently, this Mr. McDonald is a villainous mastermind who runs Chicago's underworld and pretty much everyone else in the city. Mr. Gambit's man had most likely been gambling at the store, which is Mr. McDonald's establishment. Mr. Hickman said the man probably lost soundly and wasn't likely to get out of town until he'd settled his debts one way or another. So there I was, deprived of my escort just as my journey west was starting to get interesting. Thankfully, fate is on my side today, Katie, because just as that thought entered my mind, Mr. Hickman informed me he too was heading to Salt Lake, and, as luck would have it, on to Frisco after that. He wondered if I might accept him as a suitable escort instead. I'm certain there isn't a more suitable escort alive, and I told him so. He smiled at that, and what do you think I was rewarded with? The knowledge that our Mr. Hickman has a set of the most darling dimples any man has a right to own. They settle so deep when he smiles, you can even see them through his whiskers. Well, what do you think of that, my Katie? My very first adventure out west. I've always seen myself as too spirited for the damsel in distress type, but I will tell you, it's not such a bad spot to be in when the likes of Mr. Matthew Hickman come to your rescue. Oh dear, what am I jammering on about? Burn this letter after you read it, won't you? After all, I am on my way to be married. It's not a sin to admire a handsome, brave man before the event, is it? Speaking of being engaged, that tiny box Mr. Gambit's man showed at me had a wedding ring in it. Darling, I don't mind one bit telling you it's the ugliest, most gaudy abomination I've ever set eyes on. And I've seen my share of repulsive wedding rings at Madame Lovelace's establishment. I don't mean to sound ungrateful for Mr. Gambit's generosity, of course. Heaven knows how much the center stone alone cost, but I couldn't even bring myself to try it on. Dear me, I'm determined to do everything in my power to make him happy. But Katie, if wearing that horrid ring is essential to his happiness, I'm afraid I may start our life together with an argument. Don't worry, though. I'll be kind. But for sheer practical reasons alone, I won't wear it. How on earth could I handle silk and taffeta and chiffon without shredding them to bits on such a conjugal atrocity? Anyway, do take extra good care of yourself, dearest. Your most affectionate sister, Lily Clara. Lily Clara's wedding clothes. The dress is constructed from silk, lace, chiffon, and taffeta. All are in the color of candlelight ivory. The veil is chiffon. Silk rosettes and ribbons embellish the gown. The ribbons, hems, and edge of the veil are decorated with the most delicate embroidery motif displayed here. It was inspired by the lovely sago lily I've seen on my journey west. The back of the gown boasts an 8-foot train that can be gathered into a sumptuous double bustle.